Hello, and welcome to Attunement. In this podcast, I, with the help of some of my powerful friends, will be exploring healing personal, intergenerational, and collective wounds, the side effects of oppressive power structures, activation of connection to spirit, oneness and awareness, and the intersectionality of it all. Let's connect the dots. Hello and welcome to another episode of Attunement. My name is Jauregui, and I'm here today with the incredible Adrienne Marie Brown. Adrienne is a New York Times bestselling author and editor, poet, artist, healer, facilitator, organizer, and a fellow podcaster and co-host of the How to Survive the End of the World podcast with Autumn Brown, which is so brilliant and has been so enlightening for me in so many points of my life. So y'all need to go check them out if you have not yet. But yes, welcome to the podcast,
Thank you
Adrienne.
so much for having me here. I'm really grateful because I feel like we're both siblings in this moment in terms of how we're trying to approach things. So like when you reach out to me, I was like, that's what I've been doing. It's like, let me have some conversations publicly to try to understand this moment and hear different perspectives. And it feels like we've been covering like some different ground, but I feel like I'm excited to flow in from my ground and have you flow into, like just this to me is what we need to be doing more and more. It's just being like, okay, what are you learning? What am I learning? Like there's not some clear thing necessarily, but there's a lot of what we're learning and trying to piece together. So yeah, I'm really grateful that you've been exploring this curiosity of yours and I get to be a part of it.
Same. I think that one of the biggest reasons why I reached out to you is right now. So I'm about to re-release this podcast. It was something that I kind of started back in 2020 as an Instagram live and then moved into different mediums. And now finally, I feel like Spirit is like, no more paywalls, no more nothing, like just give these conversations to the world,
Beautiful.
And so yeah, and I feel very strongly that right now, because it's right around the time of election, I want to focus in on the election conversations. I had conversations with third-party candidates that I'm going to kind of be dropping and releasing. And I wanted to tap in with just cultural workers and amazing thinkers and feelers like yourself, and just hear your own thoughts about where you are in this moment, what this moment means to you, and kind of how you're navigating it. Because I think for me, I've definitely reached a point of disillusionment with the duopoly that has me in a space of not even wanting to validate it anymore is where I'm coming from. And that's why I've explored these conversations with third-party candidates. Haven't necessarily endorsed anyone specifically yet, but just more so having the convos and trying to put our other options into positions of visibility, because I feel like a lot of folks don't even know that they have options. So many people in the United States are so uneducated politically, and
That's
what
right.
their options are, how to vote down a ballot, like the fact that it's not just one president every 4 years. We're talking about full administrations. We're talking about who's in the Senate and who's in the Supreme Court. All of these things are all vital to the workings of the system.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I'm noticing a whole system breakdown in front of my face this past year that has shattered any more illusions for me.
Yeah, that's great.
And I'm kind of moving from that space personally, because I can't spiritually vote for one of those candidates is how I feel personally. But I would love to hear your thoughts, where you're at, and kind of like your approach to this moment.
Yeah. So I think to get there, I'll rewind a little bit, which is to say the first time I engaged in the duopoly dance was in the 2003-2004 election. And we were bombing Baghdad. We were escalating towards war in Afghanistan. I had been marching in the streets and I was weeping. I had the same feeling that I've had this past year of just like something horrific is happening in our names and we have to stop it. We have to stop. We have to get Bush out of office, because if we get Bush out of office, then that's going to really stop it. And we didn't get Bush out of office and we didn't really stop it. And it lasted for 20 years, right? And in many ways, destabilized so that it will last perpetually. Like it will just keep going
They
on,
want forever
right?
wars. They need the
Right.
forever wars. That's what they're banking on, literally.
Exactly. Right. And I feel like at that point I had already gotten somewhat politicized that I was like, I understand that the US came into existence through acts of genocide and slavery and horror, and that the founding of the country was in those wounds, which have never healed. And so the system just keeps adapting and adapting towards capitalism, towards more expansion, towards more, constantly wanting to be more and more the superpower of the entire world and to control all the resources in the world. Like I have no illusion about that all left a long time ago, right? So
Right.
I went on and I did direct action organizing work and supported an organization called the Ruckus Society for years to increase their functionality. And then I was an organizer, but my
You
my work
mind
is
expanding
mine
on
was
the
a
Ruckus Society?
facilitator. So the Ruckus Society, which I love, trains people to do nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience, right? And
Amazing.
it's like, here's how you do a protest well, a march well, things like that. But here's how you do an action well. So when you think about the high level actions where people are like banner dropping on a bridge or off the side of a building, or when folks lock themselves down to shut down the BART
Wall Street.
in San Francisco, right? There's things like that where it's like that is a skill set. And you need to know how to do it so that you can keep your people safe. You need to have people who are like, these are the police liaisons, and these are the folks who figure out where everyone is when they get arrested. And here's what you do with your body when they come for you. And like, there's just so many aspects of training to learn to do that work well. And I did
Effectively.
that work for like 5 years because I was like, I don't believe in this electoral process. I do believe in people power. I do believe in action. And then I've always been a facilitator. So I always would support movement by having folks who were trying to change lots of different things coming into a space together. And my work was, how do we find the pattern inside of all of this brilliance? How do we find the next step forward? How do we make a strategy that will help our people get liberated? So that's the work that I've done my entire adult life. So
My heart feels very connected to that.
yes, right. And it's like I have learned a lot through that process. And in it really transformed my concept of what voting is and who elected officials are to us, right?
Okay.
So I think when I was younger, my belief was like, this is a representative of me, right? That's what we learn in schools. Like this person is a representative of me, my values, our nation, etc. Right?
Mm-hmm.
When I went through the process of learning to be a direct action oriented person, and when I really steeped in with organizers, it changed. And it was like, whoever you're voting for, that's the person you're targeting. That's the person you're
Your
going to
opponent.
be. That's
That's
your
your ally.
opponent. That's who you're pressuring to change. And I'm a visionary, like future oriented person. So I'm like, I don't like the idea that we even have to orient towards these folks at all. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'd really rather be Zapatista model, like just we're in the woods, we're building our future, we're doing our
I'm
thing.
really ready for that, like all the way.
I think
I'm
that
all the
some
way
of
there.
us are, but I think the majority of the country, like you said, is not politically educated and is not
1000.
necessarily ready for that, and is trying very hard to keep their heads above water, is trying very hard to take care of their families, is trying very hard to dodge all the assaults that are coming constantly from living inside of capitalism as a person of color, as a queer person, as a trans person, et cetera. So a lot of the work I've done has been like, how do we find the intersections where people are like, oh, we share a target, we share an opponent, let's come together as a community and build with each other as a community our vision for the future, and we share who we're pushing up against. So
Yeah.
fast forward now to
That's
here and
definitely
now.
where we all, I feel like, need to really start dismantling towards, is that kind of thought process. And in that kind of thought process was why I was like, okay, I personally would like to take the role of gearing people's conversation towards other options besides the
Towards
dual voting.
alternatives, exactly,
Exactly.
right?
Educating them about their options. Because I don't like telling people what to do. That's a whole thing for me. Like,
Yes,
I'm
it's
not
more
trying to
like
tell
there's
you
actually yes, that's my
there's
thing. It's like, do you
options.
even
There's
know that
ways
there's
we
a
can
menu, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
there's a menu, there's ways we can open up this conversation, there's ways we can disrupt on all different fronts
Yes,
in order to get an outcome that moves us towards a more collective movement. Because
exactly.
we might all be playing different roles in that movement, is what I'm also seeing. Is that
Yeah,
like,
but even the way you're thinking about it, your brain is already thinking like an organizer brain. right? Like you're like, I want to shape the world. I want to be part of shaping the world. And I want to get together with other people who want to shape the world. And I want to practice. I want to get into experiments where we actually learn how to do something different, right?
Yes. And
So
try, at least
I'm
try.
very excited about all the people who are like, yes, I want to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we come to this moment, this electoral moment, and I've been feeling a lot of despair this year. You know, I
Same.
have been just sitting there and just being like, okay, we're doing all the things that should flip these levers, that should move these levers, right? People are protesting, people are taking direct action, people are moving things at the court level, people are moving things at
Divesting.
the international level. And then the boycott, divest, and sanction strategy that has been ongoing for years and years. And we've escalated it this year. Like there's been so much organizing and pressure, and yet we have not been able to stop the bombs, stop the money from going over there. We haven't been able to do what we needed to do. So I found myself really panicking like in July. It really, you know, because I hadn't been focused on the election. I was really like, I'm not thinking about this election. I don't even want to spend any time on it. It's not helpful. I'm going to focus on organizing. I'm going to focus on how to help Palestine and how to also help the Sudan and help the Congo and help the Tigray and help Haiti and help, oh,
Yes.
now
It's
Asheville. And
all
like,
It's
you know,
all
just sort of like
connected.
all of this crisis is connected. How can I bring
Yes.
my attention to all that work? But then I looked up and I was like, oh, it looks like Trump is really about to come back into office again. And now he's coming, you know, the last time around, I feel like he was so unexpected and he was so chaotic that I don't think he was able to even be that effective as a president, except as an agent of chaos. You know, I think that a lot of people are like, okay, we're going to not pay that much attention to him. That's a lot of what he does, right?
I
And
think
he
that's
does
his
it
entire
very, very
role.
well, you know?
Yeah.
But this time he's showing up and it feels like he's like, oh, I figured out last time that folks weren't trying to listen to me. This time I need to be more organized. And this is where the Project 2025 folks come on board and they're like, oh, we have a really great plan for how to drag us all the way backwards through time space continuums. Now, what happened for me when I started, I read over the Project 2025 documents and I was like, oh, this is what they have all been trying to do.
Since Reagan.
Everything's been moving this way, right? For exactly. This is what folks have been trying to do, maybe not as organized and maybe not as explicit, right? But this is what's been moving and actually successfully, right? So it's
Right.
like the fact that the Supreme Court looks the way it does and they have no checks and balances on the kinds of decisions that they make, that's already happened. The Roe versus Wade, the Dobbs, all of it, all these things have already been in motion. So then I was like, okay, what does it mean to be anti-genocide and to be anti-fascist, right? How do I hold the contradiction
Well,
of
they're the
that?
same thing to me,
It
you know.
is the same thing, but in this moment, it's not showing up as the same thing for people, right? So for some people, they're like, I'm focused on stopping fascism, and only one of these candidates can do that. And then we'll worry about everything else later. And for some folks, they're like, I'm worried about stopping genocide. Neither of these candidates is trying to do that. So this is my move, right?
But
And I'm
I feel
like,
like genocide is a symptom of fascism in a lot
I
of ways.
absolutely agree
You
with
know
you.
what I
Like I
mean? Yeah.
absolutely, to me, like I would add to it that I'm like colonialism and capitalism function through genocide and fascism, right? And it's all like the story that you can tell people that gets people like, I'll participate in that somehow, right? And
Mhm.
so I started having these conversations with people where I was like, help me understand how to move through this electoral process. I didn't actually go into it with a clear, like, here's what I'm hoping you'll tell me. At the time that I was starting to have the conversations, Biden was still the candidate. And I was like, I
Right.
can't vote for him. He has looked in my eyes and basically said, fuck you to me for an entire year. He has said one thing and then sent money. I can't do it. Right.
Right.
And it's not because he's old and any of that. It's because of this particular issue and the way that not just the fact that he's done it, but the way that he has oriented towards Americans while doing it, right? Like when you hear over and over again, the majority of the country doesn't want this, but you are going to keep doing it and we can't stop it. Like to me, I was like, I
Yeah.
can't do it. So I started having these conversations and I talked with people who I've known for 10 to 20 years, some of them my entire adult organizing life, who I have watched do massive base building work, who I know to be visionary, and who I know to be committed organizers. So I come from that sort of old school sensibility, which is like a lot of people are willing to sit and look at their phones, will look at the news yell at their televisions, but they're not necessarily going to move out of their house, go knock on doors, go find out what their neighbors want and need, and go participate, right?
Facts.
So to me, I'm like, I'm not as interested in individual opinion or even emotional opinion about what to do in moments like this. I'm
Yeah.
really interested in what do the people who know how to mobilize lots of people and move as a block and think in collective ways, what are they seeing about this landscape, right? So I have these conversations and I had a wide range of people on. So some people were like, you know, I'm going to vote blue no matter who. It's fascism. We got to deal with it. Right. And then there were folks who were like, I'm a revolutionary socialist who's my vision for the world is this whole other way. Right. And I try to get the whole range because
Right.
I
Me
expected to
too.
hear lots of different answers from people. Right.
Uh-huh.
And what was fascinating to me was I kept getting similar answers, which were we need to decenter the way people think about the presidential election first and foremost, right? That folks get so fired up about this particular decision and they don't think like what you said was so brilliant to me, beautiful, is they don't think down ballot and about everything that's happening 365 days a year that produces the kind of government that we have, right? So folks were like, first and foremost, like this happens, and I have watched it in my adult life. Every 4 years, all of a sudden, everyone's like, this is the make or break thing that determines everything about your values and your life and everything
Literally.
else, right? And then the next day after the election, everyone goes back to their lives and then they wait. And 4 years later, they're fired up again. So a lot of folks are like, first of all, pay attention. If you care about issues, pick those issues, find organizations that are working on them, donate to them, donate your time, your energy, your finances, bring that, shine that light on them, right? And organize every day. Find something that you care about and give your energy to it every day. So that was one of the first things. The second big thing that emerged that was really exciting and surprising to me and made sense was the strategy of block and build, right? That is like MAGA is trying to do a very particular thing. The Project 2025 is a particular thing where it's an explicit move towards fascism and it's an explicit move to have no constitution, to have no democracy, whatever. It's not the what I think has been the slippery slope that we've been on. It's like saying like we're just gonna cut through it all and go straight there, right? So folks are like, that is bad for every population in the country. Like that will break down every population in the country. But what it looks like to block and build can be different. So it was like, we don't have to argue over who you're voting for president necessarily. Like, I'm not going to tell, I'm like you, I'm like, I can't tell you what to do. And I'm definitely not speaking to people who are like, I'm grieving, I'm mourning family members, I'm going through this. Whether they're in Gaza and Palestine or in Lebanon or in those other places that I mentioned, I'm not going to
Yeah.
go to folks who are experiencing that and say, hold your nose and go be a part of this process.
Or
But
what you're
I am
seeing is invalid. You know what I mean? Because
exactly, or what they're feeling is invalid. I'm just like, no,
yeah,
I was like, I deeply associate to this. I was like, I don't know that I can do this. And there's so much more that I can vote for that's down ballot, right? So
exactly.
that was the first piece was like what it might look like to block and build in your community might not have much to do with the presidential election. It might have to do with who are you voting for governor, who are your senators, who are your
Supreme
local
Court
council
representatives
members,
in your
court member,
state
exactly, right? So
or your
it's
school
really
board
getting people
members
to
in your
like
state.
school board, like this is where all this stuff is. These battles are happening at each level. So
Yeah.
every place should have a slate that's like, here's who we're voting for locally. Now,
Yeah.
what was surprising to me was that a lot of these organizers were also like, our organization is going to endorse Kamala Harris. Our organization is going to endorse this. And it's not an endorsement of like, we think she's a great person, but it's an endorsement of this is the candidate who can win of the candidates that are available right now against Trump, right? So I took that in. I kept hearing it one conversation after another. And I was like, I hear and understand that. And I'm like, it's really hard to look at Claudia and Karina, to look at Jill, to look at other folks and be like, Cornell, I know Melina, like there's folks who I'm like, I know these people, I've seen them. Some of them I know, some of them I don't know, but I'm just like, I agree with everything that they're talking about. And I can see very clearly that none of them have a path to the White House, right? So
I
for
think the
me,
only one, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a fact. Like, there's
that's
no
just no, I
surefire
haven't
fact
had
for either
anyone
one of the
who's
two
been
of
like
them.
arguing, everyone who's been like, well, what about this candidate or that candidate? To me, all of them have said, we know that they can't actually win, but we
But
feel like it's important to
it's
still have
about the
this
statement.
divestment
It's
from the
about the
statement, right?
statement.
And
Mm-hmm.
I was a part of the uncommitted movement that,
Me too.
emerged. And I was just like, it makes a lot of sense to me to say we withhold our votes. We're trying to use this as an organizing lever
But she
to
didn't
do this
listen to that. And
strategy.
that's where I'm at is like, there's no red line. They don't
Right. This is
care.
my thing, right? Is she did
Yeah.
and didn't listen, right? Like I think that one of the things that struggles is a struggle for those of us who are like, this issue feels very clear and it's confusing as to why it's not clear to other people. But
Mm-hmm.
from a politician standpoint, I'm like, oh, the moves that she makes that are like, here's how I'm listening is I'm mentioning Palestine in these speeches where it's never been mentioned before. I'm saying this, I'm saying that. I hear the people who are like, after the election, she's going to do this. I'm like, I don't think we bank on any of that. I just think that when I look at Project 2025, I'm like, it doesn't seem to me like it will help any of us organizing for Palestine to have those strategies in place, right? And that's like the organizing terrain, right?
Yeah, I
Go
hear that.
ahead.
I also feel like when I think of that, this is where I'm at with it too a little bit. And maybe this is controversial to say, but in a
Yeah.
ways, I do feel like we kind of deserve another Trump presidency in a way because we are not taking any of this seriously as a
Who
collective.
do you mean by we? Who do you, when you say
Like
we
as a
deserve and
collective,
we
like
are
the
not?
American consciousness and the folks that are like not our everyday organizers that are in this work that know what we're talking about, that are being nuanced, that are having these kinds of conversations. I'm more speaking to like the folks who are fanatics of the duopoly, that they literally
Uh-huh.
just
Uh-huh.
are on either side of a fan base and are
Yes.
cheering on their favorite
And they're just
member.
like, everything is normal. And
And an
that's how I
election,
wanted to
exactly. And an
pretend.
election is
Mm-hmm.
like a stage for them to have this moral superiority to one another, whatever direction it is coming from, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that way, when I see what's happening with the duopoly and the way that they play with our human rights to play that game and into the emotional, psychological warfare that goes on in American public because we are such a propagandized nation since birth, you know?
Yes. Yes.
Because it's essential to settler colonialism, the same way that Israelis are so propagandized since birth to believe in their state, to believe in what their mission is.
Yeah.
It's like it's so deep rooted, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
in
Can we
that
keep
way,
going down that path? So, like, if the Trump presidency were to happen again, right?
right.
What do you imagine would change for those people?
Yeah, what I saw in 2016 when Trump came into office, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the people who voted for Trump weren't necessarily, the wild bigots that he is. Like when we're talking about representative democracy, or uh, like identity politics. Excuse me, that's what
Uh-huh.
I'm.
Uh-huh.
For.
Uh-huh.
We're
I
talking about
got you.
identity politics. I feel like Trump is hugely plays on, the older slash ingrained white supremacist rhetoric and delusion and entitlement to that whole fan base, and that's not going to go away. It just kind of like brought it to the surface, and so we have to deal with it on a cultural level. And that's what happened in 2016. We were forced to confront something on a cultural level in a way that I've never seen before. It was unprecedented to me because even
Mm-hmm.
liberals were calling out things that were you know when a Democrat is in the space, I
Yes.
feel like we downplay fascist choices and moves, and even like the way Kamala's speaking, she's speaking like a center or right of center politician right now. She is
Yeah.
not progressive in terms of her approach to the border, in terms of her foreign policy when it comes to Israel, Palestine, like everything that comes out of her mouth is, I mean, she's a cop at the end of the day. You know what I
Well,
mean?
and I
She's
think it's
a very
also
good
keeping in
one.
mind like the Democratic Party has been in this drift right for a long time. Like
Exactly.
I think that there
Exactly.
used to be a sense of like, this is what the Republicans do and this is what the Democrats do. And
Exactly.
it's gotten like murky. But I think it's also, for me, what I keep noticing is what we're actually talking about is elitism, right? What we're actually talking about is like the needs or the wants of those with the most resources and how to navigate politics through capitalism, through elitism, right? That it's like, oh, like the reason this is coming together is because the folks who have the resources to shape politics right now, who actually have a lot of that power in the country, they want very similar things. And so even like, you know, when you look at Democrats, often the politics that they're articulating that they align with us on are like, you know, we hear it like, here's women's rights, here's, you know, people of color, da 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 da. But then what we don't hear and never have agreed on is, you know, foreign policy. I was a major critic of Obama when he was in office, and I was just like, oh, foreign policy, immigration, and you know, border issues, prison issues. We're deeply not aligned on those things.
Mm-hmm.
I feel very clear on my politic as I navigate these things. What I don't feel clear on is, or what I haven't felt clear on, is how we get from where we are now to a condition in which the politic could actually work for us, right? I've identified for years as what I call a post-nationalist, right? That for me, what that means is I already feel, yeah, I already feel like the national experiment of America to be a multicultural democracy failed. And it failed because it was built on wounds. It was built on unsolid ground. It was built by people who didn't see everyone as human. It was built by people who didn't see disability as mattering. It was built by people who still had a desire to conquer the world. And so that's the world, that's what this nation
That's the
has
foundation.
centered. And even if we take, you know, we'll pick up a storyline sometimes. We're like, we like that MLK storyline, but like we don't do that deep level cultural shift to make sure that people are like, in my heart, I really deeply align with what he says. And so then we end up in these situations where we're just swinging back and forth on a pendulum that
Yes.
actually doesn't move very far from bad to
Yes.
worse to bad to worse. So
Agreed.
I'm agreed with you, like on the big picture. I think the big thing that's been happening now is just like, so then which path forward? And I think the thing that came out of the conversations I had was like, there's a certain level of this that is out of our control or out of our power. And
100%.
there's a certain level of this that is about having the humility to recognize we don't have the organizing power now that we need. So there's the block the bad, block MAGA, but then there's the building the left aspect of the strategy. That part has deeply appealed to me, which is like, yeah, we do deeply need to build the left. And what that everything that blocks MAGA is a left building strategy, and everything that builds the left helps to block fascism from growing because it brings people into right relationship with each other.
Yes.
And so I, you know, like a lot of the folks that I had on were like, you can vote for whoever you want to vote for. As an organizing strategy, we're trying to mass mobilize people to do the biggest block that they can do. And then on the day after the election, we're still going to need each other and we're still going to keep organizing, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
in that heartbeat, because
Yeah.
everything you just said is so incredibly valid. And I mirror the thoughts so deeply in my process, you know, and I feel really deeply on, I think I've made a choice within myself that building the left and building our organizing power and our people power is more important to me than battling Kamala on semantics. Because for me, like what I said, what just to bring the through line point of why I mentioned why 2016, I felt a cultural shift in 2016 of a clear separation between people who are willing to die for the old world and people who are willing to die to build a new one. And that is where I'm at right now. And it's been 10 years since then for
Yeah.
me. And that was like that was the first election I ever voted in. I was 18 when I
Oh,
voted.
wow.
Yes, and I'm 28 now.
Okay.
So this has been me. I've been, you know, over the course of BLM and the Palestine movement for the past 4 years, I've been incredibly radicalized by my real life
Yes.
experience in organizing and being in these spaces and building people power. I have chills as I speak
Yeah.
now.
I love
And
that.
for me, this election is like a culmination of if we continue to pretend like liberal politics are going to save us or they're
Hmm.
easier to deal with, I
Hmm.
think that we're going to continue this cycle of perpetuating what they know they can do, which is give us lip service about how progressive they are while they slowly shift further and further to the right for their donors that they mirror with Republicans. It's the same people
Yeah.
funding both people. You know what I mean?
So
And
I
not
have a
all of the
question for
same
you.
people. Uh-huh.
Do you see, because I think what was amazing to me when I was speaking to these organizers, I didn't hear any of them say that they thought the Liberal Party or the Progressive Party or the Democratic Party was going to do anything for us, right? Like,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? Like, what I saw folks say was of the candidates that can actually reach the White House right now, here's the differences between them. and here's how those differences will impact the most oppressed people, right? And that's always, since I started doing this work, I come, and maybe we should share that with each other a little bit, because I always try to be like, where do you enter this conversation? I come from a middle class background. I had two parents who, um, one of them came from a poverty background, one of them came from an upper middle class background. And I grew up in a military lifestyle. My dad was in the Army, okay, for 30 years. My dad was in the Army. He was the chief of war plans for the US Army at one point. It was a big, like, talk about being indoctrinated into
Inside of it, like
patriotism,
literally in
right?
it.
It was
Yeah.
like I believed in this project. And when I went to college in 96, that's when my
I was born that
politicization
year.
okay, see, we're on this, look, we're aligned. Okay.
I
So
love
when
it.
I was starting my politicization as you were coming into this world. Okay.
Yeah.
And
And I never went to college either. So my political education is very,
but you found
yeah,
a way, like, and
yeah,
people, I do think that folks who are meant to be leaders, like what you're doing, shining a light and being a leader on, like, there is another path,
yeah,
we find our way and someone
yeah.
finds us. I always tell people I'm so grateful I was politicized before social media and the internet, because I had people sit down with me and be like, here's what the military does. Here's why
Right.
you grew up in all these places. Here's what these occupations were actually about. Here's what was going on. And I had to come home and reckon with my family and be in relationship with them. And one of the things that became very clear to me was there are people suffering because of the US. There are people suffering because of our policies, and there are people suffering in the US. And if I'm going to live a good life that I can, sleep well at night and at the end of my life be like, okay, I gave all I could, then I need to make sure that my attention is centering the most oppressed, centering those who are harmed, and being accountable for my part in that, right?
Yeah.
So
I hear
in
that
this
deeply.
moment, that's actually been the piece where I'm like, oh, if I was just voting from my heart, I would be voting socialist, right? Like if I was just voting from my heart, if I was just voting for like my values, that's the move that I would make. But I
Alias,
think about
alias
that they're
campaign.
all brilliant. Like I've been, like I watch, I listen. I'm like, these are brilliant women.
And they're
If we ever sit down
organized,
together, I'm like,
actually organized.
exactly. And I
Yeah.
also am a member of the Working Families Party, which I don't know if you've brought anyone on. Have you gotten a
I have not.
conversation with them?
I don't think so. No.
I highly recommend
I would
speaking
love
with
that. Yeah, I would love that. We
Eleni
can connect about
Stamp
that.
or Maurice Mo Mitchell, but their work as a third party is deeply moving to me, because the way that they move is, how do we build a third party that is focused on working families, that is work on the most vulnerable people who are like
Hmm.
trying to show up every day and make a living and feed their families? How do we find the candidates who will help our folks move through this life, right?
Yeah.
Not in some theoretical visionary, someday we're all going to do this way, but like right now, this family has a need, right?
Yeah.
And because I'm like, I have to be accountable to more than myself. And I think we all have to figure out how to be accountable to more than ourselves. Then we have to figure out, so what is the right move to do that? Now,
Yeah.
everyone's going to come to it. I think people will come to different conclusions. And for me, I'm like, I actually deeply respect people coming to different conclusions.
Yeah. Me too.
What I think is happening right now is people literally have different strategies for how to organize through this moment.
Yeah.
And what I keep getting curious about is like, can we hear each other? Right. So all
Absolutely.
the folks I know who I've been organizing with for a while actually have a lot of alignment around this block and build moment, but it's taken rigorous humility, right? It's taken a lot of rigor to say, we wish we were in a place where we could organize this way and we could actually break the duopoly, but that's not one of the options right now, right? The question I keep coming to is like punishment, right? So what I hear people talk about is we need to punish this current administration for how they've been behaving. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
But I don't,
do you know
and
what
I
I
feel
mean? Have you
how
heard
what I
this?
said oh, and even what I said kind of, I feel like can be remnant of that we deserve a Trump presidency
That, right?
because
So I'm like, that piece of it, that's why I asked you the we question, right? Because I'm like, when I think about
definitely
who
not the most
deserves
marginalized, but
not the
also
most,
the most,
but that's who will always experience it, right?
but
So like every single
they're also
time, yeah, go ahead.
experiencing, I'm sorry, they're also, I feel like, experiencing it right now and have always been experiencing this. And I feel like for the ones
Exactly.
who are most marginally oppressed, the ones who are truly out here and get directly affected by things that Trump does or directly affected by things that Biden does, is all working class folks, and none of them are being represented by the duopoly on either end of the spectrum. So, and I get that that's not about representation. I think for me more, and again to bring it one more time.
Can I challenge it? One thing that you said there.
Yeah. Because I
think it's important, right? That it's like the people, working class families and folks who are the most marginalized, they are suffering right now. Palestinians are suffering right now. Everyone's like the suffering right now is.
I still don't know how it gets any worse.
Right?
You know what I'm saying? Like,
I think that that's the scary part, right? Is that when people say, I don't know how it gets any worse, it's like it gets significantly worse and we're heading into a worse period, right? So I don't know where you live, but like I live in the deep South. So in the deep South, I live in a place where in this short period of time, like since the first Trump presidency, I've lost access to abortion, lost access to pornography, lost access to, there's almost no FEMA funding for now the hurricane season that are coming through. Like things get worse, right? Like, so when we think like, oh, 2016, things are already pretty bad. And for marginalized communities, they're already pretty bad. Things have gotten distinctly harder to organize. And when I say worse, it's not even like worse, like, oh, our suffering is as bad as someone else's suffering. It's more like, there's more chaos and there's more battles. There's more front lines that we have to attend to. So like what I've been able to do over the past year is been like, I'm mostly investing my time and energy on Palestine, like bringing attention to Palestine. That's what I've been focused on, right? As soon as this hurricane hit, I'm like, now I have to bring my attention back here because the state that's supposed to be helping us out is not able to help us out. If there's more tragedies added to that, if there's then all the trans folks are fighting for this, all the queer people are fighting for the right to get married, all the protesters are fighting for the right to even protest. Like the stuff that's laid out in Project 2025 would make it harder and harder and harder for those of us who are like, I want to be in solidarity with Palestine to do that work, right? That's the piece for me where I'm like, and again, that still doesn't say to someone, don't vote your heart. I'm like, if you can't figure it out, then vote what you need to vote for, but pay attention to the down ballot because that's going to shape the policy that's in your community, in your state, and everything else. And divesting from the duopoly doesn't necessarily mean punishing the most marginalized people. Divesting from the duopoly means building up viable third-party alternatives that can actually truly contend for the White House. Like, so that's why the Working Families Party to me is interesting because they're like with each election from the ground up, they are placing people into office who are aligned with what the most marginalized people need. To me, that's the way over time, because the situation we're facing, MAGA, the right, that didn't happen overnight. That's a 50-year strategy, right? 50-year strategy. And we're trying to figure out like, well, how do we break the duopoly in 2 months? No, it's not going to work like that.
Well, that's a fact.
It's not going to work like that,
agree
right?
With that.
But what it is like, what I keep figuring out is like, I feel your fire, right?
Yeah.
I feel my fire. I'm like, how do we harness that into what happens every single day? Because that's what's actually going to create the change. It's not actually as much about who's going to vote. And I will say this, I keep seeing people getting into these battles and expending so much energy trying to fight over this decision when it's like, we're not going to, I don't come into a conversation like I'm trying to change your mind. I come into a conversation like, I want to learn, I want to understand. I keep listening for like, someone show me what your strategy is and show me what it looks like long term. And when I hear people who are kind of like the we deserve Trump or let's burn it all down or whatever, I'm like, great, then what's the plan for care? Yeah, tell me about it.
I think I also have an idea too, not just that. So the way that I see it is when it comes to Kamala or Trump, if Kamala's in office, I feel like or when Democrats are in office, I feel like on a cultural level, people don't feel the urgency of needing to protect the most vulnerable, the same way that they feel it when their own rights are also threatened. Like what happened if Trump comes into office is that more Americans are going to suffer. More Americans are going to be under or just put into a position where they don't have the privileges that come with being an American in the global context of society, international society. Because right now we are the most privileged globally speaking. Even though we
Oh
have
yeah.
a
Oh
whole
yeah.
lot of folks who in here suffer on the same levels of people that people do globally because of our internal structures and how they don't function all the way. So for me, when I'm thinking of why I want to focus on third party, to me, I see a way forward if Jill and Butch are successful in getting 5% of the popular vote.
Yeah.
And that means that they guarantee a third party on the ballot in 2028, which to me breaks open a brand new portal that allows the American populace to even fathom a third party, which is not something that they have on their plate right now. They don't even know Claudia and Karina exists.
Right.
When I look at the articles, they never even mention the PSL party because that would be outrageous. But they do mention Jill and they do mention Cornell. And and the way that I see it, Jill has the most momentum behind her because of the amount of years that she's been trying to do this.
Yep.
She has the most momentum behind her, the most positioning on actual ballots where you see her name. She's an option for you to click,
Yeah.
when you go in to vote. And because of how abysmal the situation is between Democrats and Republicans, I think a lot of folks on both sides are completely disillusioned with their parties
I
and
think
are
so
either
too.
not going to vote at all or are going to vote differently this time. Whether that's Republicans voting for Democrats or Democrats voting for third parties,
Yeah, but like if you're saying, because this
My
is the thing I
strategy
keep
is
figuring
not
out
to
is I'm
talk to
like,
whoever's already voting for Trump or who already has decided they're voting for Kamala or voting for
right. But
Trump.
you're
I'm
saying
trying to
you're
talk
trying
to
to aim
folks who
for
are
people who
not
are like
voting.
undecided, not voting. I was not going to vote anyway, so might as well help a third party come into the space.
Exactly. And if they get
Yeah.
5%, they can get on that ballot and they can get $10 million, or I think it's 10 million of federal funding so that they don't have to use the very little that they're able to grassroots raise right now to spend on trying to get on ballot access, which
Yeah.
they have to do every single time they run in the election all over again. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which
Right.
is such
Right.
an expenditure. And another thing that I really love about Jill is she does not take any money from any PACs. There are no PACs. When I look at all third party options, there are no conflict of interest when I look at their financial records. Who is
Exactly.
donating to these people? There are so many conflict of interest when it comes to Kamala's record on who pays her and who funds her campaign that do not
Yeah.
allow me to, with a conscious choice, like within a conscious mind and heart and sound alignment, to
Yeah.
vote for her just simply because her words are not going to match her actions because of her financial record. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I mean, I
Of
think
who
I
is
love this
voting for her.
idea, right? Like I feel like I've heard a few folks talk about this, getting the 5% idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I will say this, I don't mean this to come off as critical. It might come
Not
off
at
as
all. I
critical, right?
invite the criticism. I love
I
this.
will
This is why
say
we're having
that,
this conversation.
yes, to me, I will say that I think I would have been much more moved by that if I had heard that strategy in like 2021, 2022, right? In
Right.
terms of like people being like,
I'm like,
here's,
I've been talking
here's,
about it for a year, but
here's how we are approaching this upcoming election, and here's how we are looking at the map of states. Here's how we're looking at these are the decision making states, and so we're not going to target there because
right.
targeting there leaves us the most vulnerable to Trump coming into office. But here's 9 states where like we could actually do this, blah blah blah, right? So
Yeah.
I've heard this, and but for me, I'm like, most of it has come in the last 3 months or so heading into the election, which is often right when these conversations start really picking up steam. And
Yeah. Well, there's also
from an
active
organizing
suppression of
perspective,
these
I mean,
conversations.
there's definitely active suppression.
That and
And
it's
but I
active
also think
voter
that
suppression too,
organizing is like overcoming suppression all the
A
time.
100%, a hundred
Organizing is saying, you don't want us to have a 5-day work week. We're gonna press through that. Organizing is saying, you don't want us to be heard. We're going to create our own media. You don't want
Yeah.
the people to know. We're going to knock on their doors and talk to them. So for me, there's this organizing piece of it that's like, great, that's an awesome idea. I don't see how it's going to get pulled off for this election. And that's not my business, right? Like in a way that's like, because that's not the strategy that I'm focused on.
Yeah.
I'm like, cool. I hear people doing it. I'm like, great, go for it. Do your
Yeah.
best. And still, after the election, we're going to all have to work together in whatever conditions have been created.
1000%.
And what I'm interested in is like, how do we create the best possible conditions for that work that we need to do together? And so to me,
Yeah.
I'm like, we can be in alignment, right? I'm like, you work your strategy, I'll work my strategy. And like on November
1000%.
10th or something, we'll talk, right? But what I'm worried about is that people are not able to hold that, like, there's a duality or multiplicity of strategies that are unfolding right now,
Yeah,
and
I agree with that.
are really being disparaging to those who are seeing things a different way, instead of being like, I completely understand why people are like, I can't vote for her, Kamala. I completely understand why people can't vote for the Democrats. I deeply understand it. I also completely understand why people are like, it is a throwing away your vote to not vote for them, blah, blah. It's giving your
Yeah.
vote to Trump to not, I see all of it. And
Yeah, me
for
too.
me,
That's why
I'm
I
just
wanted to
like,
have these
there's
combos.
not like one, I kept telling people, I'm like, it's kind of figuring out which loss feels the most survivable in this moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, when I'm thinking about like the most people, I don't know, I hear you saying this thing around like when the Democrats are in office, people get weaker with how they
Complacent.
do their organizing,
I
right?
think on the
And I
wider
would be really
spectrum, because I'm talking
interested.
about everybody, not
Yeah,
just
yeah,
the
yeah.
people who do the work daily, but the people who are just tapping, like I said, the fanatics.
Yes, yes.
And I think that this past year, the reason why I feel like this is such a specifically potent time as opposed to other times, and why I think that there's something going on cosmically that I feel like allows the ground for a new portal to happen, because this past year has exposed things to a degree in our face that I don't think a lot of people, like lay people who aren't organizers, have ever thought about or had in their face to this degree.
Well, I think
You
that's
know
what
what
I
I
was going
mean?
to say is like when I look back at this
So many
last
people have
10
been
years or
radicalized this
so,
year.
I see that under Obama's administration and then under the Biden administration, these mass movements of Black Lives Matter, of Me Too, and of this Palestine moment have all happened during those Democrat administrations, right? And it's been like pushing against them. It has been trying to hold their feet to the fire, but a lot of it has just been like, this is what's shifting culturally, is we're no longer going to stand by and be sexually assaulted and raped and have that be the culture. We're no longer going to have Black people being murdered by the police at this level. We're no longer going to have Palestine be an issue that we're not allowed to talk about, we're not allowed to advocate for, and that we just are sending these resources. All of that did happen under Democrats, but it didn't, it's, I don't think we reached the satisfying cultural shift, right? And I think this is one of the American problems, is that we'll have movements that start and they're very exciting and there's an exciting phase of them. And then as resources come online, as time passes, and then as the backlash starts to come up, the movements we're not able to sustain the focus and the pressure and the connectivity, right? When I look
Yeah.
at so much of what has happened, like for me, some of what I see happening amongst Palestine organizing right now is breaking my heart, because I remember watching it happen with BLM, where it was like
Yeah.
people who've been working side by side, knowing that they both cared about Black life, were suddenly turned against each other, largely due to financial resources, largely due to other things, but battling each other, and then shifting out of our consciousness as something that we could listen to. And I don't want to see that happen with the Palestinian movement. I don't want to see that happen with the anti-genocide movement. And so that's part of why I keep engaging in these conversations, is that I'm like, regardless of what happens with this election, Palestine is not going to be free on November 5th or November 6th. That's going to be our ongoing work. And Palestinians keep me grounded in the fact that they have gone through every administration that has happened in the US and have had to consistently be pushing for their humanity to be recognized and their dignity to be protected, their right to exist to be. That's been consistent. So for me, I'm like,
76 years.
whatever you're doing, like if you find yourself online screaming at someone about the election, or if you're in relationship with people and you're just yelling at them over something that's like, just set it down. Just say, I've made my decision. I don't want to fight with you about it. I do want to keep organizing with you. Let's keep it moving. Right.
Amen.
And I think that one of the places then that we have to be careful is, and what I keep seeing happen is people be like, if you participate in trying to block MAGA by voting for Kamala, then you're pro genocide. And to me, I think we have to be able to be more sophisticated than
Nuance.
that.
We need more
Right.
nuance. Yeah,
Yes, and I think we can do it, and
absolutely.
I see people doing it, but I think we need. To me, it's like that doesn't respect the all the organizing that's happening on a regular basis, and I see it from both sides. The same way that I'm like, I keep telling people like, well, it's just dumb to do this. I'm like, that is not though that's not helpful. Everybody has strategies, right? Everybody's actually moving some different things, and I put out this book this year called Loving Corrections, which
I
a
know, I was
lot of it,
about to touch on that.
okay, good. Because this is my thing is I'm like, there's a way to be in these hard conversations with each other and say, we've landed in different places, but I'm holding on to you. Like, I'm not going to let go of you. We're going to move through this together. And like, look, only time will actually tell, right? Time will actually
Literally.
tell. Like, I think that so many aspects of the collapse of this empire are inevitable. And I'm just like, let's focus on forming connections and holding on to each other. I was in New Orleans right after Katrina happened. Now Asheville is in my state. I'm watching my grandmother, my uncles, my aunts, all without power, all without resources to recover. Like this is all very close to home for me. And
Yeah,
it's going to continue. Like
to be
all of
that
these
way.
things are going to continue falling apart. But if we're holding on to each other. So in Asheville, the folks who are like oriented towards mutual aid and oriented towards building community together, they have become the hub that is shaping culture and community in the
Rebuilding.
aftermath of Helene. And they're up against militias, right? It's like very clear for people. Those folks want to, you know, control
Take
us
this
through their
land.
guns. And the rest of us want to figure out how to rebuild together. And so many people want to move towards that rebuilding together.
Agreed.
I keep thinking about that. It's like how to be in relationships that can sustain some difference of strategy while still staying focused on the same ultimate goals, which is liberation, justice, dignity, resources, like stability for all of our communities.
Yes. I also feel like that's deeply how we actually build and expand the left instead of eating ourselves alive the way that we do.
Yeah.
Because, you know, as far right as you can go, you can be a literal leftist and they'll accept you. You know what I mean? It's like, don't worry, baby. We'll sit here and we'll program you exactly like you got to be programmed to think just like us, or at least let us do what we got to do and feel comfortable about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's their
Yeah.
strategy towards new people coming into their
Oh,
ideology.
yeah.
And I feel like we really need to take a page from that book in that sense of like, we need to be much more expansive about how, yes, there might be tiers to where people can be for the organizing. You know what I mean? Like, of
Oh,
course, you can't
yeah.
have somebody who's just entering the conversations be at top levels of things. Or, you know, when we talk about like
Mm-hmm.
NGOs and stuff and how all of, you know, a big part of why these things break down, these movements break down, I feel like, is because these predatory parts of empire that
Yes.
know how to capitalize off of these things and know where
Oh,
to
yeah.
seep into these things and extract the resources that normally would be going to
Well,
help.
and I
They
love
get
what you said
involved,
because
you
it's
know?
like for me, I'm like, we need to reclaim organizing, right? From the
Yes.
right. Because a
Amen.
lot of what they're doing, it's like they're just doing organizing, which we have been doing forever, right?
Hello, the Black
Harriet Tubman
Panthers.
was
Like,
like, anybody who wants to get free, you can walk with me, right? She wasn't
man,
like, do you believe this, that, the other thing? No, she was like, are you Black? You want to get free? Come on, let's go. If you start acting up, then we have an issue. But otherwise, if you're trying to get free, that's all we actually need, right? And I read a lot about Octavia
I
Butler. I feel like
love
she's
her.
someone who studied and thought about freedom
She's
as
a
well.
prophet.
And her same thing, right? She was a prophet, but in her way, she was like, all I'm doing is saying, let's pay attention
The
to what's real and
patterns.
let's pay attention to what's actually happening in the patterns. And what's real is climate catastrophe is coming at us because we're not pivoting. What's real is World War III is
Military
coming at us
industrial
because we're not
complex is
pivoting it.
killing us.
What's real is our economy is unsustainable because it is so top heavy and so it will collapse. What's real are those things. And so what we need to do is figure out who's interested in surviving on earth, who's interested in being a human on earth. Let's do that, right? And
And
that to me is like that's how big my tent is. And I'm
I
like,
agree. I'm
I'm
with you,
really
baby.
then I have to learn like, okay, what does that actually mean? That's where loving corrections comes in. I'm like, how do I be in a relationship with someone I deeply disagree with or who doesn't see my whole humanity but also wants to survive on earth? I think we're going to have to
Man,
be in those kind of gnarly questions. But I think part of the first practice of it is in this moment being like, how do I hold on to the other people that I actually do know share my values rather than, we're so angry, righteously angry, and we can't reach the people we're righteously angry at. And so we're yelling at each other. And what I
yeah.
keep telling people is like, don't displace your anger at Kamala at all the people who are trying to figure out how to survive, right? Don't displace that anger. Keep that anger on her. This is part of why I'm like, I would elect her so I could yell at her, right? I want to elect her also so that Donald Trump can be put in his place in history. And like, I don't want to ever have to see or hear him again. There's like things like this where I'm just like, oh, I know what I'm feeling, but ultimately I want to hold on to the folks who want to survive. And the other thing I keep thinking about is in these I heard this term polycrisis, and it's felt like that that was the best articulation of what this moment feels like, where, you know,
Definitely.
I heard, folks are like, the genocide is not a single issue. And I'm like, it's not a single issue. There's polycrisis happening there, and there's a polycrisis happening everywhere else. So any issue you care about is happening
And
in
it's
Gaza.
interconnected.
And it's also happening and interconnected to all our other struggles. That's, Palestinian people have been in so much solidarity with us through so many
They
of our
really
struggles.
have, man.
And
Ferguson.
I keep saying to folks that I'm like, I'm never letting go of my commitment to Palestine. Like, I'm trying to make sure that I can stay in right relationship to my commitment to Palestine, that I want to keep being able to struggle and keep fighting. And that's what I'm going to do, no matter what happens in this election, or whatever, however many elections there are before that system shifts and changes to something that works for us, which might be, you know, we might end up as a federation of of small places, right? We might end up as some other formation. I really get curious and interested about, I get really excited about the idea of people being able to reorganize our relationship to land in right relationship to the indigenous peoples of this land, and in relationship to shared values. Like
I
that,
completely
that
agree.
feels like what deeply moves me, where I'm like, I don't need to dictate what everyone else believes or try to make everyone think the same thing, but I do need to know that I can be around people who share my values, and who want to listen to the indigenous wisdom of this land, like that, wherever we are in the globe. Those are my folks,
Amen.
right?
Yeah, that's the
So
only way forward to me is
yeah,
land back, is to make sure that we are in right relationship with this land and with each other. It's the
yeah.
only like way
And
out
like,
of it
that's, to
all.
me, it's like that's the way we decenter and decolonize, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, like I need to stop pouring my energy into thinking that solution is going to come from this place. I do need to figure out how to organize to hold the harm at bay and to protect our people as we run under this tunnel. Like, it's like we're
Yeah,
running through a portal
as we
to
render
a
the
future
system,
where we actually get to
we
be,
got to render the
right?
system obsolete slowly but surely, for sure.
Yeah, Ruckus always said that you be a wrench in the gears, right? That's like, be a wrench in the
Amen.
gears of the machinery of empire.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways to do that. And I think we're
Amen.
both doing that.
Wow, thank you so much for hopping on, Adrienne. This is
Yeah.
such a beautiful
Thank you for talking with
conversation.
me too. I want to just also really commend you for like the path you have been on to learn and to educate yourself and to get politicized. Like,
Thank you.
I think that people don't necessarily recognize, like, when you're on a path where you're like, I could go other ways, I could never look, and I could live my life, having some kind of achievement that never actually is accountable to humanity. Like, you
Yeah,
had one of those paths. That's what the path that you started off in this life on. And for you to choose to say, no, I want to be with the people and I want to understand and I want to learn. And I just feel your hunger and your curiosity. And I just want to really affirm that. Like, that's what we want more and more of in this world, is people who are like, not only am I awake, but I'm still learning and I want
I'm
to keep
still
learning.
learning. I'm
Let's keep
curious and I'm
learning.
wrong a lot of the time and I'm loud about
Yeah,
it sometimes.
me too.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, and I keep saying that I've been writing these letters to the ancestors, like, I think this is the right way, ancestors, but like, just hold me account, like, if I'm
Lovingly
wrong,
correct me.
lovingly correct me. And if I'm wrong, like, I feel like when I look back at my voting history, I'm like, I understand every choice I made and I don't regret it. Right.
Amen. Me
And
too.
that's how I want to feel about most things that I'm doing in my life, is like, I understand why I made the decision. It wasn't a decision that everyone would make, but I understand it, and I can stand by it. That's how people need to like move through this. It's like, I understand why I did it. I'm looking at the aftermath, and it makes, this all makes sense to me. Right. So
Amen.
I shake your hand, baby.
You too, baby. And I would give
All
you a
right.
huge
I'm
hug in the
giving you a big
ether.
hug, Habibi, and I'll see
Yes.
you on the other side.
Amen. And
All
I
right.
hope we can hang out in person someday so
Where
we
are
can
you? Where do you live?
chat. I'm in Los Angeles right now, but I'll be bouncing around from here to Miami and like wherever.
Miami. Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. I'll be down in Miami, I think maybe in November. So I'll email you about it. All
Amazing.
right. Bye, my
Bye,
dear.
love. Thank you
Be
so
well.
much. Mwah.
Mwah.